Guys, you remember Uwem Akpan from Say You're One of Them? He is the fantastic writer of that moving collection of short stories, which was an Oprah Book Club selection for 2009, I think. It's a powerful book filled with short stories talking about different forms of trauma through the perspectives of young African children. And it's so heartbreaking, so heart-wrenching. So it's just a sort of book that never leaves you. And for years, we've always wondered what Uwem was going to do next. And because I know him, and I'm not just a huge fan of his work, but a huge fan of the person, because he's such a wonderful man. And I've always harassed him with the question of, when are you going to write another novel, another book, And finally, last year, Uwem came up with New York, My Village, which is this fantastic debut novel, which I finished reading the very week that it first came out, but I couldn't talk about, and I'll tell you why. Uwem's novel, it's in signature Uwem style, very heartbreaking, but now for different reasons for me, because his novel, which is narrated by the protagonist, a man called Ekong, a former professor who is now in publishing and who is now gone to America to work with a publishing firm to learn the ropes, so to speak, and to also edit an anthology of writing by Nigerians, basically about the Nigerian Civil War. Now, here's the twist. The Nigerian Civil War, I'm sorry, this thing goes off all the time. The Nigerian Civil War, which lasted between 1967 to 1970, was a horrifying experience, a traumatic experience, which I have actually studied as part of my PhD. From the perspective of the Igbos. Remember when I did a review of Half of a Yellow Sun, and we talked about that particular war, because that was the war that Adichie talks about in her novel. And as an Igbo woman, I've always looked at the war as, a program against my native Igbo people, because it was like a mass genocidal attack against the Igbos. Loads of children died from kwashiorkor, which is severe malnutrition, and it was just horrific, and the rest of the world just kept silent, and millions and millions of Igbo people died in that war. There were massacres and everything. But the reason why Akpan's novel is difficult for me, and it's difficult for me to read, I read that, and spend the next month just feeling terrible, is because there's something that often happens when you read. You read, and, because literature tells us, shows us life, and this is exactly, especially true of realist novels like, Uwem's novel. And my sort of specialism is contemporary literature, and I have found that, one of the reasons why contemporary lit is I find it very fascinating, is because it talks about, life, especially as we know it, because, we're living in the times, and we can actually sort of relate to what's going on within the novels. And Akpan's novel talks about the Nigerian Civil War, from different angles, but most importantly, from the angle of those who were victimized by the victims. I don't know if I'm making a lot of sense, because this is why I've put off analyzing or reviewing this book for a long time, and I've not even discussed this with Akpan, because I found myself in a sort of conundrum, an existential situation, crisis, where I began to wonder about what it means to be a victim, really, what it means to be a person who has suffered a traumatic experience or a traumatic history, and how it's passed down from generation to generation, and how you remember it. And then every single time because of the fact that every time you think about your trauma, you're thinking about what's happened to you, what's happened to your people, the Jews and the Holocaust, the black people in slavery, colonialism, and all kinds of people groups, some of which were also mentioned in Akpan's novel, like if you've heard about the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, in which an entire group of people were destroyed, because the government was complicit in this genocide, in this experiment where they brought out black men and sort of just injected them with stuff. And it was because of that in contemporary times, remember during COVID, where we had a sort of divisiveness in terms of people who were pro and anti vaccines, because historically, when you've gone through history, you understand that specific people groups have been subjected to all kinds of things in the past. You can no longer trust what's going on with the government, with people, and those kinds of things. So Akpan's novel really hits at the core of what it means to be victims and victimizers, because in this novel we then see the perspective of a small ethnic group in Nigeria called the Anangs, where Ekong, the protagonist, is from, and how this small people group were treated by the Biafran soldiers fighting for their lives, fighting for their people, being marginalized, being attacked by the Nigerian fronts, and being massively slaughtered every single day throughout the duration of that 3-year war. And then you find that because all kinds of things happen in a war situation, they themselves were taking it out on other people, on other minority groups in the country. And so, whilst my remembrance of the Biafran War is about an attack on my people as an Igbo woman, and the remembrance of the average Nigerian, maybe from the north, is different, because they were supposed to be the perpetrators, the people who started to kill Igbos in the north, and then started the war. And then the government, of course, because they wanted to keep, because it was a war which started because a particular group of people said they wanted to leave the country. We seceded, and the country said, no, you can't leave, you're going to be here, so we're going to fight and whatnot. And that's my remembrance of it, because I had ancestors, including my own father, who recently passed, who fought in the war. He was a Biafran soldier, and this is my experience, this is my memory of it. But in Akpan's novel, a different reality sets in, that there were indeed ethnic groups, minorities within the country. By the way, Nigeria has 250 ethnic groups, arguably, or more than that, and some of these people experienced horrific massacres by the Biafran soldiers, who came to either co-opt them into this war that they had nothing to do with, or to punish them, or to sort of just punish them by saying that they were saboteurs, that they were reporting to the Nigerian side or whatnot, and they would round up entire villages sometimes and set people ablaze and set animals ablaze. And it was horrific, some of the details. It is fiction, but it is fiction that often, I think it was Michelle Cliff who says, sometimes we write history through fiction, because sometimes you read about something and then you start to research, you start to try to find out, what actually happened, because if you hadn't read about it, you would have known that something like this was even possible, or that it even happened, and this was that sort of moment for me, reading Akpan's novel. And today I'm not just going to talk about the novel, because I want you to read it. It's fantastic. It talks about all kinds of things. It navigates the world of racism in America, tribalism, and for example, Ekong finds it difficult to procure a visa to go to America to do this thing, to work in this just short term in this publishing firm. because according to the people at the embassy, they hadn't heard about his ethnic group, or whatever it is. They said that their role in the Nigerian Civil War was, it didn't exist, and so they didn't believe him. It also shows you the side of the horrors sometimes which trail people who try to immigration, and the way that people are criminalized for being a certain color, for being from certain places and whatnot. And some of those issues come into play. There's also one of his relatives who was well known, Ekong's, the protagonist's relatives, who was sending things home and helping people back home to Ekong's surprise, is passing as white in America, attending a white Catholic church where Ekong and his relatives experienced racism from even the Reverend Father, in the 21st century. So there's so many experiences, and then there's, of course, it's a bit of satire, and Ekong, of course, battles all kinds of things in New York. He lives in this apartment in Hell's Kitchen where he has to fight with bed bugs and things that he didn't have to fight with, grapple with at home, where he's supposed to be coming from a third world, and he comes here and he's fighting with bed bugs. There was a mistake and a mix-up with his HIV test, so all kinds of things. It shows you sort of what's going on, in the world through the eyes of this man in these few months that he spends in America, and he's just trying to understand. Oh, so this happens in America as well, or this happens in America, and this is not the America that we see on television. He says this is the first time he's going to America. He watches American television, speaks with an American accent like most Nigerians, and he never thought that America would be the way that he ends up seeing it. But the issue which stands out for me most of all is the issue of the Anang people. For Ekong's Catholic family and other families who lost loved ones to that conflict, it wasn't the way that people from my own community would remember losing their loved ones. They had because they were minorities, and he talks about the issue of minorities and majorities within countries and communities, and because the Anang, the ethnic group where Ekong's family comes from, is a minority which is co-opted into the Republic of Biafra, because they didn't ask for what was going on, but because of the region in which they fell into in Nigeria, they sort of automatically becomes part of Nigeria. And it is so horrifying, the details, the layers and layers of family trauma and family histories marred by this conflict and by what happened. Ekong's wife, Carol, is from a different family of people who were well known as, her father or her grandfather was a saboteur. He made them kill, somebody from Ekong's family, and that sort of is sort of conflict within that marriage, unspoken, it's silent, but it's heavy, just like we see in my parents' bedroom in Akpan's Say You're One of Them, where one spouse is Tutsi and the other is Hutu, in a story about the Rwandan genocide. And so you see, they have bits of this, but when he then goes to America, he then experiences actual racism. First of all, he's surprised to be the first black person, the only black person in the office, 21st century, which is something that happens even today. And so he feels out of sorts. His colleagues are trying to be nice in front of him, and then he overhears them, talking about him and his food, making fun of him. But he also goes out and he meets a police officer who is nice, who shares stories with him, takes a selfie, and the story about policemen and black men in America, and he carries that with him ongoing. And then he goes there and he meets this, and his relatives don't believe that this is his relatives who live in America, when he meets them and tells them, oh, well, I had a very nice experience with a police officer. And they're like, well, so there's just a lot of layers of, I don't know, but the story is funny. It's told in a funny way. I think there were really long conversations. The dialogue sometimes is stretches, and but Akpan is a master, of fiction. He tells a really nice story, and every time that he utilizes, lots of, funniness to, to some of the issues. It's always like satirical. It's like he's poking fun at racism, classism, tribalism, but some of the details in the novel will just knock you off your feet, like finding out that this long lost relative, well, it's not lost, they know him, he's bringing money home to the village, the Anang village in Nigeria, and everybody just sees him as this benefactor, to then arrive in America to find out that this man was then passing as white. That was, even I didn't see that coming. But it's a fantastic novel, which I think everybody should read. I've told you what it meant to me, reading it. I haven't gone into a lot of detail about the novel itself, but I have told you, exactly what to expect and how it affects me personally. And even though you have nothing at all to do with the Nigerian Civil War or whatever, it shows you humanity, the complicatedness of just carrying on in a world marred by class, by race, by victimhood, and all kinds of things, and it just helps you to know where to direct your solidarity. Like I began to actually think about solidarity, in terms of being a contested term, where and how do I offer my solidarity, as a victim, as someone who has carried this trauma, and then it shows me how simple it is to reach over across races, across tribes, across ethnicities, across, humanity, to understand that even if I feel that this has sort of affected me, I also owe the other human being the solidarity to say, oh, my pain hurt you, but we can find a way to sort it out, And this is what I think everybody will get out of reading this fantastic debut novel by the incredible Uwem Akpan. Please read it and let me know your thoughts. As always, please share, like, and let's just keep reading, guys, and let me know what other books you would like me to talk about in my next video. Until the next video, bye bye.